Hey everyone, my name is Chris Jonas. I'm the Director of Communications for the National Association for Business Economics. We're pleased to present today's event, which is part one of our new CBE webinar series, highlighting the many career prospects degree in economics can provide to graduates. Before we started the program today, I want to quickly point out a few other upcoming NABE events, including the Tech Economics Conference taking place in just a few short weeks, November 8th through 9th. Arranged around the theme Economics in the Age of Algorithms, Experiments in AI, Tech 2021 brings together hundreds of economists, data scientists, and business leaders to discuss the emerging and future data science needs in economic research and practice. The conference also includes an industry job fair component where recruiters and hiring economists will be meeting with candidates at virtual booths. You can see the list of the participating employers here. We have discounted registration rates for NABE student members through the early bird deadline of October 20th. That's 1 week from today. Also, if you're a current graduate student entering the job market this year, you're in luck. You can upload your resume to econjobs.org, which is NABE's job site, and receive a free registration to the Tech Conference. More details are available on nabe.com. Also, be sure to check out our upcoming schedule of certified business economist courses, including applied econometrics, machine learning and data science for business economists, and time series analysis and forecasting. Okay, on to today's event. Note that we will have Q&A open throughout today's discussion, and you can submit a question to the panelists at any time using the Q&A box. You can also use the raise hand function to be prompted to ask your question on video. There will be a resources handout accompanying today's event, and we'll be dropping a link to that shortly in the chat box. My pleasure now to introduce our moderator for today. Former NABE Director Carolyn Evans is Chief Economist with Intel. Carolyn, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you.
Thank you, Chris. So as Chris noted, I'm Carolyn Evans, Chief Economist of Intel. First of all, on behalf of NABE and the CBE Steering Committee, I'd like to welcome everyone to today's session. As Chris mentioned, this is a panel on economics, careers, and entertainment. And this session is the first of a series of panels intended to highlight the many career prospects for people with a degree in economics. So first of all, I'd like to thank and welcome our three panelists. So we have Jennifer Adams of Integrated Insight and formerly of Walt Disney Parks and Resorts, Kyle Crutchman of Spotify, and Ian Yohai of Netflix. I won't give any more introduction in terms of their bios because I'm going to ask them as part of our discussion. We're going to hear from each of them about their career journeys and their current positions. Before we get started with that, though, we have a poll for the audience. And this is to give both the audience and the panelists a sense of sort of everyone's backgrounds. So the poll, you can see the poll there on the screen. So the question is, what is your highest degree attained? And so you can answer one choice, high school or bachelor's degree in process, bachelor's degree, master's degree, or PhD. So if you could please take a minute to give your response, that would be great. So I'll wait a second while we're waiting for that. And Chris, I don't know, do we like how quickly do we see the results? Or...
We'll go ahead and launch the results now.
Okay. Okay, great. So it looks like it's about, almost 70% are some kind of graduate degree. And then we have 12% bachelor's and 11% sort of high school or bachelor's in process. So that's great background for the panelists as we get started. So the way that we'll do this is we'll start with 30 minutes or so of questions from me, and then we'll turn to general Q&A with the audience. And as Chris mentioned, if you do have any questions, if you could please enter them in the Q&A box in the Zoom session, and we won't sort of answer them right away, but once we do get to the Q&A part, we'll be able to take a look at those and answer them. So let me get started. First, as I mentioned, I said essentially nothing in terms of bio. So if each of you could take a few minutes to briefly describe your current position and then the background that led you to that position. that would be great. And why don't we go I'll just go in alphabetical order for now. So Jennifer, and then Kyle, and then Ian. That would be great. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name's Jennifer Adams. I'm currently with the consulting firm Integrated Insight. We do market research, business optimization, and strategic revenue and pricing research. We're mainly made up of former Disney alumni, so a bunch of former Disney folks. And prior to joining Integrated Insight, I worked for 21 years with Disney Parks and Resorts in a variety of areas. I did consumer insight, market research, forecasting for, think of attendance forecasting and merchandise forecasting. And I also did a lot of strategic planning work as well.
All right, thanks, Jennifer. Hi, everyone. I'm Kyle Crutchman, currently working at Spotify as the head of economics. Right now, what we're building is a marketplace economics team that's really focused on creating tools for artists and creators of all types. So I've been at Spotify since about May of 2020, which was an interesting time to change positions, but I can candidly say it's been an amazing company with their work from anywhere policies and just their focus on both mental well-being and product that's really helping creators of all types. Before this, I was at Amazon for about 6 years. There, I founded and led the economic trends and insights team. We went by Yeti for short, and we directly supported the consumer CFO. As part of that journey, I helped the Economist community grow from about 15 people to over 150 when I left, and who knows what the number is now. We'll have to ask somebody from Amazon, but it was an amazing journey that helped me understand how to apply econometrics to a business setting. Then before that, I got my undergraduate degree at the University of Pittsburgh. I graduated in 2006 in economics with a focus in computer science, math, and statistics. And then my PhD from the University of Texas in Austin, 2011, with a focus on applied econometrics.
Great, thanks, Kyle. Hi, everyone. I'm Ian Yohai, and I'm at Netflix. I lead the growth and membership, data science, and engineering team at Netflix. And the team really works on trying to boost Netflix's growth, especially in many of our markets around the world. And my team specifically focuses on pricing, our plan structure. Also, as a subscription service, we put a lot of effort into our payments system and trying to optimize that. So we use economics throughout all of that to help us grow the business. And again, especially with a focus on our emerging markets in many parts of the world. And I've been at Netflix about 8 years. I joined in early 2014, so just about 8 years. Before that, I was working in Washington, D.C., mostly with government consulting, and so also applying social science techniques to kind of government-related problems. My training is kind of a mix of political science, economics, and statistics over the years. In undergraduate, I kind of had a double in politics, political science, and economics, and then my PhD was in political science, but with a heavy emphasis on quantitative methods, statistics, and causal inference, and I've carried that through my career so far.
Great. Thank you to all three of you. So now that you've sort of given us a very high level of, what you do, could you please take us through a typical day of, what is your day like? Because that, I think that's helpful in terms of people getting a sense of exactly what you do. So why don't we go in reverse alphabetical order now? So Ian, and then Kyle, and then Jennifer.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I lead a team of about 60 people now. So I like to say I don't do any actual work. My team drives forward most of the day-to-day projects and analysis and so on. I would say my role really comes in three parts. One is to work with other leaders on the overall strategy for the business, especially in the growth area, which is the domain of my team. So that's meeting with other leaders at the company on the product side, on the engineering side, helping to contribute to that. The second would be building out and continuing to hire for my team, for example, and we are growing, and so there's always a lot of opportunities for folks to join our team and Netflix more broadly. So I spend quite a bit of time on recruiting and meeting with people and telling a little bit about the team. And then the third part is just kind of general advocacy for data science and machine learning and experimentation throughout the company. And so there's part education, part demonstrating the results that we have more broadly outside the immediate group of stakeholders that I have. So those are the three primary things that I work on a day-to-day basis.
Thanks, Ian. It's a good segue. So while Ian focuses a lot on the management side with people and process, I'm kind of split. So the team that I'm building right now is about 5 people. So instead of a day, think about a week where Tuesdays and Thursdays, I do Ian's job. I do the people management, the process management of what are we going to be doing next quarter? What's some high value actions that we can take to impact the business? What does our research agendas need to be looking like, and working with the team there? Wednesdays and Fridays then are a little bit more product focused for me. That's doing a lot of writing. So how do we turn what our economic models are into business recommendations or product recommendations? I do a very little bit of coding. It's mostly enough to keep myself fresh, I would say. My team will candidly tell you if I'm doing some coding, that's probably not the best thing if it's going into a production system, but it's something I like to keep a little bit fresh. And then on Mondays, it'd be a flex. So wherever the highest business need on that.
Yeah, my typical day has changed. It changes so much over the course of my career. So, and I know we have a lot of folks on the call who are starting out. And so I'd say, like, when you're thinking about sort of a typical day early in your career, it's going to be pretty much intensive data analysis. And what's interesting is, now in my consulting role post Disney, I've sort of returned to that in spades of doing a lot of market research work, writing, talking to clients about what they hope to accomplish from a research standpoint, writing surveys, working with survey panel data providers, doing the analysis and doing the presentation. So a lot more hands-on than where I ended up at Disney, but sort of where I started at Disney, interestingly, because I did begin in market research way back when. I think, other roles that I had at Disney really varied a lot. When I moved from market research into forecasting, I moved from a very project-based orientation to one that was very much driven by the schedule and the financial schedule, and having to constantly do reporting and revising forecasts, making that communication, and then moving then from there to strategic planning, which has its own calendar. But it's a longer perspective, and I sort of loved working in strategic planning for Disney because it's sort of like the perfect economist job of enough data analysis, but also a lot of monitoring the external environment, the economy, the competitive space, and having input into the long-term plan of Disney Parks and Resorts. So we did a lot of work on, do investments in certain, let's say, rides and attractions make sense? Or if we had invested in rides and attractions, doing what we call postmortem analysis, did they work out or not? What do we learn from these things that we can take forward in future financial plans? So I've been all over the place, and it's like your daily schedule really is going to vary a lot on like where you are in the company, and also like what department or areas that you're supporting.
Thank you. And I'm just going to build on that last aspect of your comment for a second, Jennifer, see if anybody else has any things along the line, because a lot of the people on the call are students. And so, what Kyle and Ian described probably isn't what people are going to be doing right out of school. So they're probably more the people on your team, Kyle, who don't want you to be coding. So would either of, Jennifer kind of gave us a good sense of the, throughout her career. Kyle or Ian, would you have anything to add in terms of at the early stages in a career in your organization, what the day might look like? Just, for the people on the call who are sort of, or in the earlier stages of their career. And Kyle, I'll give you first dibs because you haven't spoken first yet.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, building on what Jennifer said, the term we generally use is going to be individual contributor. And so economists will start as an individual contributor within either a data scientist or financial analyst role, or within a research economist role. And so there, the day-to-day is going to be 75% coding and math. And so you're going to be getting data, building pipelines, working with some data engineers if the data is too big to build those pipelines. But we do expect, like economists, to kind of be able to complete the full research flywheel of what is the business question, where's the data, what's good, bad, and ugly about the data to get the summary statistics, and then building a statistical model to answer a hypothesis about the business. And so what I would highly encourage anybody in the call, though, is to just think about, even as ICs, what is the best way of process for producing economic research that way. So a lot of people said they're in a PhD program. I actually wasn't very familiar with like agile methodologies or just ways of doing iterative research that I think is just very, very beneficial as wherever stage you are in your career of producing results on whatever, a daily basis is probably too frequent, but a weekly or quarterly basis can actually accelerate and help you push along your research agenda, because sometimes in grad school, it feels a little bit unstructured. At least that was my opinion.
Yeah, and Kyle, that's great. And can I just build on one comment that you made? You said that the new economist was expected to sort of, come up with the business question and put together the analytics, build the statistical model. Then, there's always that final step of translating the results into a business problem, communicating to business leaders. Sort of what place on your team does that sort of communication step happen?
So that communication step is going to be collaborative between manager and the IC. So I really do want ICs who are coming in to be able to, as I said, complete the loop. But anybody who's going to be more junior is going to be more over-indexed with my time, because as I talked about earlier, a lot of my time is writing. So I really view that my job is turning what we really do in economic research into that business impact. So, but I want generally everybody from whatever level to be holding the pen. So you have to be practicing writing at an early stage, because otherwise you're never going to learn how to speak in a non-academic language.
And Ian, do you have anything to add on this point or not?
Sure. I think it's somewhat similar to Kyle. I did start as an individual contributor at Netflix when I started as well. So my day-to-day is, was similar to Kyle. I would say at Netflix, it's probably around 80% on direct business problems that we align with our partners on, the topics that we work on, and then up to 20% in what we call methodological research, either improving our experimentation system, developing a new machine learning model that we could then deploy across many different use cases, that sort of thing. And Carolyn, to your point about communication, I think it's really central to what we do at Netflix. All of the individual contributors, brief out the product folks that we work with, and so both in writing and in oral presentations, the ability to concisely summarize learnings and information in plain language is definitely a big part of what we do as well.
Okay, great, thank you. So my next question is sort of, making that bridge between being in school and being a practicing economist. And that is, if you think back to what you thought economists did when you were in school, whatever level of school that was, what has been the biggest surprise in your career in terms of being different than what you expected? Why don't we start with Jennifer, because you haven't spoken in a little while, and then let's go to Ian and then Kyle.
Wow. That's, I think it was interesting because I sort of grew up being somebody who was fascinated by Wall Street. I used to always watch Wall Street Week with my dad and grandfather. So I always knew that I sort of was interested in economics, and I knew that economists sort of forecast these things, but I had no clue what forecasting meant until I actually got into college and took statistics and forecasting classes. So it was like I had a broad vision, but I didn't really know the day-to-day nitty-bitty details. I think what has been really surprising about my career as an economist, even when I was in grad school, I think the difference is, especially going into a company like Disney Parks and Resorts, is how much interaction there is with other parts of the company, and also how, in some sense, physical the process is, because people come to have vacation at Disney Parks and Resorts. They're consuming this in a very physical way. And part of your job as an economist or as an analyst in this company is to figure out and to monitor that. So actually being on site, being out in the parks and experiencing them and keeping an eye on operations is actually a big part of the job that I didn't really think about when I was actually getting a PhD in economics. So.
Yeah, from my perspective, certainly when I was an undergraduate, I had the sense that mostly it's about developing really complicated abstract models. And I think increasingly the empirical side is all about what we do. And I think, even the news this week about the Nobel Prize winners really focusing on causal inference and methods has just become the biggest thing I think that certainly we do at Netflix in terms of leveraging economics. Measurement is so critical to everything that we do. Right. And, these are real customers that we have. We want to improve the service for them. And I'm sure it's the same with others as well. And so how can we lean into the measurement side of things? And actually, I wish as an undergraduate, I had spent even more time in classes around measurement. I got more of that in my graduate work. But, I think that's really the biggest takeaway I have.
Yeah, I can build on that theme from both of you to say, just did not understand going into grad school how intense the math would be and should be, but then even more so how important it is to integrate yourself into what we call the data generating processes. So Jennifer's talking about showing up to the parks. Yes, for us, it's diving into the data on the listeners and the artists, because the data is just a summary of actions. You need to be a researcher who's going to get your hands dirty, understand what's creating that data and working with it. I'm sure in Ian's case, it's the viewers, because as everyone on this call, I'm sure knows, metrics can tell you a summary, but you might be missing some key component that's going to be super crucial to your research if you don't get your hands dirty and get involved with that product or the operations that's creating the data.
Yeah, and I'll say, I think, when you're in school, sometimes you're just handed a data set. And as you have all alluded to, it's a completely different world when you're actually dealing with real world data and need to understand that data generating process. So, sort of related to that point and related to the previous question, if we have 121 participants on here, a lot of whom are students. Do you have what I wish they taught in school type of information that you believe is important? I know either for undergraduates or for graduate students or for whoever. So, for those who are still students, they have a chance to do that while they're still in school. So I'll throw that up. Is there anybody who wants to take that one, who has an answer ready?
I'll just say that when I joined Disney, I had zero education in survey analysis and writing, which is sort of surprising given how reliant we economists are on data collected by surveys. So it was interesting to sort of quickly get educated on that. And so if you're thinking of trying to go into an area where survey research is going to be heavily leveraged, like market research, consumer packaged goods, the travel and tourism industry, say entertainment, having some of that background would certainly be helpful. Kyle mentioned project management. That's another thing I think was very important. I actually didn't have project management. I went back and took a class in that. I would say it's always good to stay up on whatever the latest and greatest statistical programming language or techniques are. That's going to be a reoccurring theme throughout your life. Just accept it.
Yeah, I could build on that too. I do think coding is, really important to be able to apply, especially with the big data that's available now. I'm dating myself, but I graduated undergrad in 2003, so I think it was a little bit before the big data revolution, and I didn't have any foundation in computer science or coding. I kind of learned as I went, and I think if you have an interest there, it just makes being able to contribute in these areas a lot easier given the size and volume of data that we have now. And so the raw statistics are very important, but I would also say being able to apply that through coding is also quite important.
And I can build on what the forward-looking aspects is all the trends are moving towards distributed work environments. So in the project management and the coding tools, all the tools that are going to allow you to work asynchronously and different locations than your colleagues. So candidly, pick up an internship project, but make sure it's not one where you're going to be required to show up in person, because we're going to have optionality in the future, and every company's trending towards where some people will be working during their days, some people will be working during their nights. So if you can figure out a way to do an actual project that encompasses these project management data skills asynchronously, would be very, very beneficial.
Yeah, and I will add for companies that have an international presence, right? That's sort of just built in naturally, that point. So great. And the next question is sort of, as an economist in your organization, how are you viewed by senior leadership, by colleagues and peers? I don't, just sort of your general thoughts on that, because presumably in your organization, that's not a majority of economists. So you're sort of, your own world there. And, how do you see your role in the organization? Why don't we start with Ian and then go to Kyle and then to Jennifer?
Yeah, absolutely. As I was alluding to a few minutes ago, I think measurement is key. And I think it's less about economics versus other disciplines that focus on measurement, because I think we all try to speak a common language. And I think there's nuances between the different disciplines, but that's kind of extracted away when we report to the business side of the house. I think really the rigor in the thinking, and then for specific areas, as I mentioned, my team works on pricing, where obviously economics is central to that. I think that's really where the value adds specifically of the discipline, but more broadly, just being very rigorous in thinking and data-driven and measurement-focused. I think those are the largest things that I think resonate with senior leadership at Netflix.
Yeah, I'd agree with that on the abstraction away. So for myself at Spotify, I'm rapidly changing the understanding from a team that's focused on analyzing external market trends to what Ian's talking about, of putting applied microeconometrics into the business. So at Spotify, data science and research science is very well established, and Spotify's off the charts in understanding and utilizing them. So I'm just teaching how economics and econometrics can be a tool within those toolbox. And specifically, as Ian said, willing to tackle some really big, hairy, long-term research questions, such as like substitution patterns that people are thinking about for years, and applying the tools of causal inference, as he mentioned, plus also empirical I/O to inform the product and strategy. And again, willing to take on the big challenges, that things that haven't been solved are the things that really excite me. And I think that's probably the reputation that the team has, is things that we've tried to measure for the past 5 years that have been very hard. Taking a different lens through econometrics has been very, very fruitful and promising.
Yeah. Interestingly, at Disney, we don't have a chief economist at all. We don't have an economics department. The sort of economics is sort of spread all over the company. I mean, I can talk more about the parks and resorts side, but I mean, between revenue management, different pricing teams, market research, marketing analytics, we have our own data science folks who have quite a large team. And then, of course, finance and all the financial planning and forecasting functions. It's all over the place. And I think people appreciate the insight that economics as a field brings, but it's baked into all these different areas. So I think what's key is being able to recognize that we all have to work together for the common good of the Disney company, say, and be able to figure out, how to best proceed with some of these analytical problems. But for integrated insight, everyone loves economists there, but it's a small group of us. So.
Great, and we're getting close to the end of our sort of pre-planned Q&A. I just have 2 more questions. The first one will be just for you, Jennifer. If you could talk a little bit about the CBE certification, because I understand that you helped develop some of the curriculum. How valuable do you feel it is when it comes to expanding your professional network or job search and career advancement? So that'll be the first one. And then the last one, just to give everybody a preview, will be what's the best source for finding jobs like yours or on your teams. So Jennifer, do you want to respond to the CBE one, please?
Yeah, the CBE Certified Business Economist program is a series of classes to gain the CBE certification. As Carolyn mentioned, I had worked on some of the coursework for that, for particularly like the managerial economics and strategy class. I mean, the focus of this, of the CBE, is to help you transition from what you're learning in school to being that hands-on applied economist that a lot of employers need. So thinking about, applied econometrics, statistics, data science, as well as the management strategy, being able to speak effectively and pull together effective presentations, all of that is included in CBE coursework. And of course, you gain the benefits, hopefully, of maintaining your NABE membership and all the great networking opportunities and educational opportunities that NABE as a whole allows you to experience.
Thank you. And do you want to just tag on how people could find jobs in your area or internships? And I'll just mention to everybody, as Chris mentioned at the outset, we have some resources for people, some links for people to go to look for information about internships and jobs and things.
Right.
And Chris, looks like Chris is putting it up right now. And I think there's also a link in the chat box. So that will be there, but just, over and above that, Jennifer, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, as you can see, there's some links here for particularly for Disney, that we have a professional internship program. So that's going to be internships focused really on your field of study. So if, lots of data science roles, finance, market research, you name it, you can probably find a professional internship in that. And that would cover not just the parks and resort side, but it also covers our studios, Disney Plus, the other side of the house. Careers, if you're looking for a full-time role, also at disneycareers.com. I also put in some links for those areas, like if you're interested in market research, Quirks is a publication on market research techniques, and they also have a job board, and I know Disney will occasionally post there, but prolific postings in the market research side of things. And then I threw in some links to the IBF, Institute for Business Forecasting and Planning, and the IIF, International Institute of Forecasters. That's also details and different classes you can take on the forecasting and planning side, and they also have job listings. And if you're interested in survey methodologies, there's a lot of survey classes out there now, but one that's particularly strong through the University of Maryland and University of Michigan is their joint program. And so they also have some short courses. So if you're like, I can't take a whole semester, there's some short courses of a few days that provide some great insights. If you're interested in travel and tourism as a whole, I would say target the companies of interest. Most of them are posting their jobs out in LinkedIn or on their job board. So by finding those core companies, you can see what opportunities are available within each of them.
Thank you. And then Kyle, do you have anything to add on that?
Sure. Specifically for Spotify, lifeatspotify.com is going to have all the open roles. For anybody who does not have a PhD or a master's level, they should be looking for data science or financial analyst jobs. PhDs would look for research economist jobs.
Yeah, and from my side, if you go to jobs.netflix.com, you'll have access to all the roles. Again, if you search for data scientists, again, we don't really break it out by subdiscipline, so just search for data science. And we are doing an internship program this year. So if you search for calls inference intern on the site, you'll see the job posting, and we encourage applications for next summer.
Great, thank you, everyone. So we're going to turn to the audience Q&A now. Before doing that, we actually have another poll for everyone. So Chris, if you could put that up, this will hopefully give us a sense of how much people in the audience use these services. So they ask, which of the following do you subscribe to? Netflix, Disney Plus, and Spotify. Not that it has anything to say about our panelists, what the results are, but if you could just mark it, that would be great. And we'll just wait 1 second.
like we have about 75% response rate.
Okay,
And okay, we'll go ahead and launch the results.
okay. Okay, so wow, 89% subscribe to Netflix. That's wow. And Spotify's looking good too. And Disney Plus 50% is also very good. So clearly, all three of these services are very popular in the audience. So that's great to see. So our first question from the audience is going to be from a student at the University of Cincinnati. And so are we able to bring him into the video room so that he's able to ask his question?
Yep. Okay. Piper, if you just want to accept the invite.
Okay, great. So, okay, great. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time to come out and talk to us today. So my question is, what sector of the entertainment industry has economics impacted the most and how?
Thank you. I'll toss it out to our panelists. Is there anyone who wants to tackle that one?
Yeah, I can go first with kind of a provocative answer for this panel, but I think the answer is, in my opinion, is video games. Video games are a controlled environment with objective functions, action spaces, and outcomes. And that's the economic way of looking at it. The simpler way to think about it is The Sims came out 30 years ago, and now we're all talking about a metaverse. So you put those two together, and if you look at the economies that get built within video games, a lot of times they really foretell a lot of the trends that are going to be happening within either physical or the digital space.
Yeah, I totally agree with Kyle, actually. Is that, and then just think of some of the economics of the technology coming out of video games, right? So you look at series like The Mandalorian, where a lot of the effects being built on game engines. Now you're even seeing that being pushed into physical attractions like dark rides, attractions like the Void, augmented reality. Some attractions are inducing gamification to try to get people to interact more with the attraction and get feedback from the attraction. So I think video games are definitely an area going forward that are going to be a very hot area of economic research.
Add, Ian, or you agree with that answer?
I do agree. I do agree with video games. I would say maybe the other one I would add is just the kind of subscription services providing entertainment over the last 10, 15 years, and obviously Netflix and my colleagues were also part of that in their respective companies. But I think it has changed the way certainly content is produced, and we've seen that revolution. I think most intensely in the last couple of years as competition, at least on the TV and movie side, has really heated up. So I think that's another thing to keep an eye on going forward as well.
Great. Thank you, Piper, very much for your question.
Thank you.
And it's great to hear what you students are actually interested in hearing about. So that's excellent. And Diego, do you have a question as well? Oh, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, so thanks everyone for sharing your insight. As a master's student who has to write a thesis, I was wondering what sort of research questions you wished you could explore in the context of entertainment platforms.
Maybe somebody, if people don't have ideas necessarily in terms of a student, but maybe a burning research question you're interested in that you think would be interesting generally or for a student to tackle.
Well, I mean, certainly, I think one of the interesting things I was thinking about when and again, it related in some sense to the gaming question was, well, think about it from attractions, right? or the travel and tourism industry, a lot of where we've gone historically is we have a perishable service with limited capacity, right? So you have all these different, price discrimination strategies. Moving into the concept of video games or just virtual reality, now you're moving to unlimited potential supply, right? For things like just think about concerts, right? Concerts in the cloud, so to speak. There's no capacity constraint, right? So how do you price some of these things as we move increasingly into virtual reality where we don't have to worry about having so many seats? The seats are unlimited, effectively, as long as you have an internet connection, right? So that's just concept that has always intrigued me.
Kyle, Ian, do you have any thoughts? Or that was a really interesting idea. No, if not, I've got a whole long list of other questions that people have. So I can jump into those. And Diego, thank you very much for your question, and good luck on your research project. So thank you. Okay, so the next question I'll ask, and these are all coming from the audience, and the first, this is sort of a very general question, and it is sort of for someone who wants to get into the entertainment industry specifically. Do you have any tips other than applying? I think we heard mention apply to those companies in the industry. Are there any tips other than that for breaking into the entertainment industry, if that's specifically what you're interested in?
Well, I mean, I would say that if you have a specific, I mean, we're talking as economists here, but if there's a specific thing that you're really focused on, making connections through networking would be the key thing. So I'm thinking, like, if you're like, I really am into art or museum attractions, which is a sort of niche portion of the broader theme park and amusements infrastructure. The key thing is really making those connections through networking and being able to show how you can add value in that space. So I would not be necessarily hung up on like, oh, I have to apply to a Disney or a Hilton or a Marriott. You don't have to go that route, but you definitely should be looking for those networking connections that can help you get into the career you want.
Yeah, and I would add, this is where passion can also be very important. So I'm not a musician myself, but I'm a huge music fan. And so that's one of the huge things that drove me to Spotify. And Spotify, obviously music is part of the social capital here. So it really is, I think the one thing to keep in mind is so many companies now are entertainment companies. So in one aspect, this is a very broad question, but what could also help is, again, pairing that skill set with something that you care a lot about, because there's nothing stopping anybody from being a creator, either of videos, of video games, or being involved with creation of music or podcasts. So if you figure out something that you want to pair your economic interest along with a passion that you have or a creative aspect, that'll go a long way into guiding you and also showing a potential employer how much you would like to work for them.
Ian, do you have anything to?
Yeah, I mean, but mostly just +1 to Jennifer and Kyle. I do think that networking is quite important because, those informal connections really go a long way. You can read a job description on a website, but it may not really capture everything that, the company is necessarily interested in. And there can be a lot more dialogue if you're able to make those connections. So just trying to get out there as much as possible through conferences and other things, I think is quite important as well.
Great, thank you. So this next question it's a little bit of a different flavor, but the question is, what's the most difficult part of your job? So far, I think we've all talked about the positives. Every job has negatives. Do you have anything to say about the most difficult part of your job?
Sure, I can go first. The most difficult part is ambiguity. You have to be comfortable with uncertainty. So it's going to be uncertainty not only on like deadlines, but also uncertainty on outcomes and business process. So, and as economists, that is our job, is to quantify uncertainty, live in that environment, and then still produce research and results that impact the business. So that's the hardest part from a day-to-day and long-term view of, is just your job is to be an ambiguous problem solver. And you can put whatever skill sets you need there. Then the other hardest part is just from a people side is how do we trade, like you said, work in an international environment and maintain a collaboration that's continues to be productive. That's something I think the whole world is figuring out. So I don't feel like I'm alone here, but it's just, I'll say candidly, it's new to me. I was talking to one of my economists on my team at lunch today saying 3 years ago at Amazon, I said, no, I don't want to hire any remote employees because we're going to be an in-person team. So kind of growing through that too on how to be distributed first and learning and iterating, which maybe goes back to the theme of ambiguity.
Yeah, for me, prioritization is often one of the hardest things. There's any number of things we could be doing, but we have finite time, and we can only have so many people working on a given area. And so trying to figure out like what are the biggest opportunities and constantly reevaluating as we go. Like if we start on something and maybe we're a couple months into the project and we realize maybe this isn't as working out as exactly as we'd hoped, being willing to pivot. And it does take some discipline because you could pursue, it's not like a dissertation or whatnot. You could spend your whole life working on a single thing, but that may not be the most impactful thing. And so just being willing to have that open conversation with yourself of, hey, maybe it's time to move on to something else, I think is something that, we have to think about all the time.
Great, thank you. And I know, Jennifer, you had to drop for your internet drop for a second. So I don't know if you heard the question or not, but it was, what's the hardest part about your job?
I mean, I think, at my time at Disney, sometimes the hardest part was really some of the financial analysis where we had to really make some tough decisions, particularly during the time of COVID. As many of you know, Disney Parks and Resorts had to, furlough mass quantities of people, and we laid off lots of folks. I myself actually lost my position due to the COVID crisis. So, going through that situation was, it was very trying. And I know a lot of folks within the travel and tourism industry have not recovered. So that's a tough part of the job, is sometimes, things hit the fan and it's, there's not a whole lot you can do to control these things.
Thank you. So this next question is for those people without PhDs, but who want to work in some sort of high-level data analysis, applied economics role at any of these companies. What are your opinions on the necessity of a doctorate? Do you find your dissertations prepared you for your roles today? Kyle, you touched on that a little bit when you talked about the research process, but I don't know if you have anything else to add in terms of the necessity of a doctorate and whether your dissertation helped you prepare for your role. And then Ian and Jennifer, if you have any thoughts as well, once Kyle's done, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. To expand on what I said earlier, a master's degree you should be learning and be a mastery of the tools. So the statistical tools, the coding tools to be able to produce a product. The PhD is where you have a mastery of the research process. And so that, I guess, goes to what I was saying about ambiguity, where the PhD really is a license to where you own, operate, and lead the research process. So that's what I see as a clear distinction. And like at Spotify and at Amazon, that's where we had a delineation between what would be a PhD economist role versus a data science role. Generally, you're going to be using the same tools. It's just going to be, are you going to be focused on answering the questions, or are you going to be focused on developing the whole research process? And candidly, when I was doing my PhD, I didn't realize like how important that was going to be until I was put in the situation to where it was my job to answer long-term economic research questions, and the PhD did help that. As I said, it might not have felt like the easiest way, but it felt very murky, but that was part of the process, because our job with like a PhD is to be thinking 3 to 5 year long economic research agendas, and that can be within tech, within entertainment, within academics. So the PhD is what trains you to be ready for that.
Yeah, I agree with Kyle. It's really about the mental model more than anything else, because I think the skills can be acquired a number of ways. I would say that, you know, if you have a master's degree and you've demonstrated, or maybe through early career you have some experience, it's not that, at least at Netflix, it's not like you won't be eligible for any positions if you don't have the PhD. It's really about, you know, through the interview process and whatnot, being able to articulate the type of work you've done and the kinds of problems you work on. So, you know, I think the PhD is more about the training, but if you're able to pick that up through other means, through work experience or outside interests or whatnot, I think that can totally qualify you, at least at Netflix, for any of the positions that we have open.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. Well, I mean, I think within Disney, the PhD really wasn't a requirement. We do have obviously some folks who have that, and some of them are working on specialized, you know, projects. But I would say fundamentally, like, in order, if you're interested in sort of moving up the food chain at some of these large companies, it's both having the analytical skills, but also having that business skill. So I think that's where the balance is where I see people being more successful. Was they're not being siloed within either, let's say, market research or data science. They're moving beyond that to say, I can talk to the broader business problem. And so I don't think you necessarily need the PhD for that, but you do need to know where to invest in some certain skills to talk business to leadership.
Great, thank you. So we're getting close to the end, but I have one question I want to make sure that I ask, because I'm sure that a lot of people on the call are thinking about jobs. And that's the question: what suggestions do you have in preparing for the interview? Will it be more like a take-home case study or a technical interview, or, you know, maybe how many stages are there? And, you know, obviously every company does it differently. But if anybody has any thoughts on that, I think that would be helpful for people to hear.
Okay. I don't know if Disney's still hewing to this. I mean, this was pre-pandemic. But typically what we would do is there were screening interviews initially via Zoom or via phone call to narrow down the pool of candidates. And then we would typically do an on-site interview, which would take most of the day. And you would meet with various, you know, usually pairs of people from different areas, different folks you would work with, for a good, 40-minute discussion. They would get feedback on what you would be working on, which interests you. And then we would usually do some sort of case study. So this would either be, if at the lower levels, maybe more of a financial analysis exercise, a statistical exercise. It could be just questions about, like, hey, we're thinking of building a theme park in XYZ. What would we need to think about in order to assess whether this is going to work out or not? Just some very general questions on, like, business case analysis. And we also take folks out to we would take folks out to the theme parks themselves, right? So you got to experience the product in its grandeur. as a guest.
I can talk a little bit about Netflix as well. It's I think similar in spirit to what Jennifer was talking about. Typically, you would first talk with the hiring manager for that particular role, and just to get a quick sense of your background and so on. And then we would do another phone or Zoom screen, mostly focused on technical work, and that would be with one of the other individual contributors on the team. And it would be a mix of kind of methods, questions around statistics, kind of building off the expertise that you have, as well as some light coding, questions, and then maybe a few product use case type questions just to see about product thinking. And then if that initial screening goes well, then we would move to the onsite, quote onsite. Obviously it's virtual right now, in two rounds essentially. The first one is more technical, kind of building off some of the topics that we cover in the initial screen, going deeper. Generally, we could either do it through a particular case study and then asking, how would you analyze this thing? What methods would you bring to bear, and have a good discussion around that? Or it could be a little bit more tailored to the specific role. And then also, again, trying to judge some of that product thinking as well. In the second round, we will typically have the candidates talk with one of our business partners, so a product manager typically. And there it's really about, can you express to the points we were covering earlier around kind of non-technical communication and being able to engage with a business partner who doesn't have the same training in economics or statistics or whatnot, as well as a session around our culture, because at Netflix, our culture is very important to us, so there's kind of a culture discussion as well. So those are the major components of the interview. I wouldn't, at least at Netflix, I wouldn't worry too much about, I really need to study up on XYZ method. Really about, stay with what you know and try to explain that as well as you can, rather than try to cram into something that you really aren't as comfortable with. And if you be open about that, hey, I don't really know about that, that's going to go a long way. Don't try to fake it if you're not really an expert in that area.
Yeah, and I could comment that Spotify is very similar, like a process standpoint, with what Ian's saying. And the one thing I think I would add is just become familiar with the STAR methodology, which is situation, task, action, and results. And just be used to explaining answers and behaviors and situations like that is pretty common within tech, within the interviewing process. So that methodology makes it very crisp, clear, and concise on what we're doing. Specifically with economists, it can help really codify a way of where the impact from the research or some of the methods will have on a business result.
Great. Thank you, everyone. It looks like we only have 2 minutes left, so I don't think we have time for another round of questions. But if does anybody have anything else they'd like to add in terms of something that you haven't gotten to in the last hour that you want to add? If not, that's fine. We will just close it out here. So thank you everyone for participating. I think there's a link to some of the resources that we have in the chat box. And as I mentioned at the beginning, this is the first in a series of panels about economist careers in different industries. So stay tuned, and I'm sure we'll have some more exciting opportunities to come and see another panel. So thank you everybody, including the participants.
I want to thank everyone for joining today's webinar. Just as a reminder, we have a few other upcoming webinars as well, including our NABE Tech Economics Roundtable. We'll be hosting an event next Wednesday, From Tweets to Wellbeing. Sentiment analysis reveals how well-being evolved in Europe during the COVID-19 pandemic. We also will then have part 2 of our CBE webinar series. Next time, please join us on November 10th, and that will be the Economics Careers in Finance. And then we do have our NABE Transportation Roundtable hosting a webinar on November 18th on the holiday retail outlook. All NABE webinar recordings are available through the NABE Connect app and for NABE members on the NABE.com digital archive. Thank you all again for connecting today.